Welcome everyone to our next in the webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about Vendor Center customizations and enhancements. I took a peek through the participants list. I think most of you already know me. If not, hi, I'm Eddie. I'm joined today by two other people that you probably recognize, Travis and Brianne. I'll pause a few times to go over if you have any questions as we go through this. But don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat. And Travis and Brianne will also be monitoring that. So they'll either reply in the chat or they'll flag it for my attention and we can answer it live here. So without further ado, we can dive in. To begin with, the Vendor Center offers a pretty significant amount of customization natively out of the box. It just needs to be set up and configured. So some of these pieces include purchase orders. So vendors can receive their own login credentials to the system, log into NetSuite, similar to Employee Center or your normal employees, and they can view any purchase orders that are associated with their vendor. That's going to let them see purchase orders that are open. They can track the status, shipments, see the details of the orders, quantities, items, things like that. They'll also have access to a transaction history in the form of a ledger. So this is going to let them see a list of their vendor bills and payments related to, of course, them. They're not going to be able to see other vendors, just their relevant records. Again, letting them see the status of, say, payments, what they're owed, what you think they've been paid, and help minimize any communication mishaps in there. And another thing that they can do is time tracking. So again, very similar to the Employee Center, vendors can track and submit time worked on projects, especially helpful, say, if you have a special consultant maybe that's helping you with a client project, or even if you just have a vendor that's billing for their time and you'd rather they track it in your system so that you can stay on top of it in real time rather than getting surprised by the invoice at the end of the month. A few further capabilities of the Vendor Center, depending on what add-ons you have, include purchase requisitions. In many ways, purchase requisitions are similar to purchase orders. It kind of depends on how your system's set up and what way you decided to go and what worked for you. Very similar to POs, they can have access to view purchase requisitions directly via the portal. They can also submit their proposal responses to RFQs. That way you don't get all your proposal responses lost in email or have to aggregate them across multiple different sources and channels. You can have everything go into one system and have them all listed there. And finally, you can have non-conformance reports. So vendors can complete pre-qualified NCR reports, and that again helps keep all the data in a single system and minimize all those multitude systems of multiple channels of communication. You can funnel them all into a single system. That's definitely going to be a theme of today. So some screenshots of what this actually looks like. You can see that view transaction history is an example of that would pull up that ledger. I believe we've got a screenshot of that in a moment. Can view the purchase orders there. We've got that vendor request for quote. So thumbing through here again, this is their purchase order list, so they can see their statuses. They can know right away that this PO, right, for instance, was rejected. The others have been billed and so on. And if they go ahead and open this up by clicking on the date, they can see the individual items associated with it, and they can also trigger a printout. Just like everything else in NetSuite, you can add approval workflows or any other type of workflow on top of this. So here's an example of a purchase order related to the vendor, right, that can be approved or rejected. And again, vendor can be immediately informed of that status.
And Eddie too, I just want to interject here. I know that we have many clients that are using some of these processes, and just so everybody knows that when that when that record is submitted, it could be a requisition, or it could be that requisition turns into a purchase order inside NetSuite for the end user, the company who's using NetSuite, and allowing their vendors to come in. That's where that approval process sits. So they are approving or rejecting that, and then that feedback comes back into the vendor center and is recognized on that transaction by the vendor. And so I know that many of our clients use that and in terms of communicating with their vendors. And then there's also opportunity that you could have like a rejection reason if needed, which is just further communication through the portal for those processes. So I just wanted to mention that because I know some of that is a favorite of our clients. So go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Travis. And that reminded me too, if you have a process where your vendor needs to acknowledge that, hey, we acknowledge this PO and we can deliver on this. That's another thing that they can sit on, right? So they can view that and press the acknowledge button so that they've seen it and have kind of made a commitment to you. Here's that ledger view that I was talking about earlier. In this case, there's bills and no payments in this example. But you can imagine the payment would be very similar, right? And then you've got your current ending balance on the statement. Similar to the other ledger views that I'm sure you've seen in NetSuite, they can customize the date range and have some basic sorting. So while this is native, of course, it can take some configuration. And so, of course, many of you are likely already leveraging a lot of these features. If you need help leveraging it, or you feel like there's pieces that you're missing out on, obviously we're here to help in any way we can. So moving on to some of the more customized pieces that can be built on top of and or feed into the vendor center. What I'm going to talk about for this small section is outsourced multi-step manufacturing. I know not all of you are manufacturers, but hopefully it helps demonstrate kind of what is possible and gets your mind flowing. So in this case, a manager can come in and create a parent assembly item. Of course, the parent assembly is going to be made up of several other smaller assemblies. And so managing that, especially in a multi-step outsourcing process, right, can be a bit of a hassle. So this is a streamlined method. They can pick which parent assemblies they need. They can add as many as they want here. When you go to press submit, it's going to build and kind of drill down into all of the subcomponents. And you can also choose, right, the receive by date, items request date, and then you can see here that one vendor is automatically shipping it to the next vendor. Then the next vendor gets it, and then they ship it to, say, your warehouse, or if you're doing a drop shipping type product, they could even send it directly to the customer, right? So this helps you easily set up that chain, as well as swap out different vendors. Maybe one is overloaded or closed for the holiday and you need to send it to a different, maybe non-default vendor. You can easily change all that with this view. Once you go to create the batch, the system's going to automatically draw all that out, including any work orders, including any purchase orders, in some cases even transfer orders, right? And so that's all going to flow into your native NetSuite system without having to create each and every one of those records manually. And how this flows into the vendor center process is now you have purchase orders for each vendor, and they have, of course, this vendor, right, is going to see that they're shipping to this vendor, and they can have their address info, they can see that PO, what items need to be made and when they need to be delivered by logging into their portal. So that's one example of kind of how this can be leveraged into your bigger process inside NetSuite. Another example, updating delivery dates en masse. So maybe you have a vendor that does hundreds or even thousands of orders. It's not always easy to have a web interface and click through one by one, right? That works for low volume. Maybe you have a ton of volume and you need to do mass updates. That's where this CSV and Excel uploads can come in handy. So how this can work. An example, they have a custom page accessible via the vendor center. They have an export button that will download it as either CSV or an Excel file. They can then make any changes to that file. So say expected due date or status or even quantity, right? Maybe they don't have 10, maybe they can only commit to 5. So they can update the quantity of 5. You know of that right away. Same with expected delivery date. You set a expected delivery date of the 1st. They actually can't do it till the 15th. They can update that. You can be notified, and then it could even be flagged for you to take further action, right? Maybe it goes back to pending approval, and you decide if you want to keep it, if you're going to get it 2 weeks late, or if you're going to go with a different vendor. Let me get some of this Zoom stuff out of the way so I can navigate a little better. Okay. So I have some examples of what this can look like. Here's vendor information portal. Again, this could be accessed via the vendor center. You can see they have the download XLS button. That's going to download their Excel file. They can make any changes they need to, and then they can upload it back. And they get their status in essentially real time. You can see they've made several changes throughout. It looks like they're ramping up, being used more and more here. And if there's an error, the error handling, of course, can be up to you. So in this case, if there's any error at all, they fail the whole batch. That way it's not confusing on which ones still need updated. It could also only fail the ones that don't make sense, right? So in this case, it looks like they attempted an upload, had a typo of an O instead of a 0. So they went and fixed that file, and 2 minutes later, did another upload, and 7,000 records were able to be updated. Here's an example of what the Excel could look like. This one is pretty busy. Again, all the columns and fields are totally customizable, so it can be as simple or as busy as you like. And it can also, of course, have permissions tied to this. So if you have a malicious vendor, or more likely someone that accidentally typos or changes some of these PO number fields or things like that, you can ensure that they can truly only update their own records and not accidentally or maliciously update records for another vendor. Okay. Another common customization we see is being able to let your vendors submit tracking numbers to you, as well as kind of shipping notifications. And again, it's all staying on top of their statuses and pipeline, right? You want to know if they're going to be late. They need to know what they have outstanding and committed to you. So that's where this comes in handy. This one, instead of being Excel based and upload based, is helpful for some smaller volumes. And I've got an example, live example of this in the other screen here. So of course, it doesn't always have to look like NetSuite. In this case, the client wanted to go with something that's a little bit more of a traditional web interface. So this still lives in NetSuite, still accessed via NetSuite, but you can see it has kind of a different design to it. So they have overviews up here. The vendor can immediately see the expected ship date. So they're late on this one. This one's coming due pretty soon. And then this one has plenty of time for the moment, right? These order statuses can be automatically updated. You could also let the vendor choose to change or manually update the status if you wanted. Search, so they can search by PO number and limit this potentially large list to just those items. And then of course they can enter a tracking number here. So in this case, they're expecting separate tracking numbers for each item. It could easily be modified, right, to have a tracking number per PO if you're expecting it in one box. And finally, there's notes, so the vendor can leave you a note on the individual item. Maybe they can't fulfill all of them or need a line of communication with you. They can do all of that from right here. Okay. We can also submit vendor bills to NetSuite. So again, natively, Vendor Center is very big on viewing purchase orders. You can view summaries of vendor bills in that ledger format, but you can't really submit or create them. So that's where this customization comes in handy. We see this the most with some of our clients that work with a lot of smaller vendors, maybe sole proprietorships, maybe kind of mom and pop type shops that don't have a standard invoicing process, or you just work with a lot of vendors, and having every vendor submit their own invoice can become tedious very quickly, right? So this allows them to essentially submit a form for their invoice. It'll automatically create a vendor bill waiting to be approved in your system, and you can take action on it from there. Again, as an example, this was meant to replicate the native bill screen as closely as possible. You can probably tell it's a pretty close copy. They still have access to both items and the expense sublist, so regardless of which one you're using. And it can also be restricted, right? So maybe your vendors that pop in here don't have access to all of your items like an employee would. Maybe there's only certain items that are available for that specific vendor. This selection list can certainly be limited to that as well. Pending approval, of course, whenever you're having a third party enter data into your system, of course, you don't want it to automatically be approved. You want some sort of a process on that so that you can keep tabs on it. And I don't know if we have a screenshot. We don't have a screenshot in here of that. But again, everything we're talking about today lives in NetSuite, and so can have that approval workflow or other processes, be it an approval workflow or some other extra customization or even an existing customization, right? Maybe you've already customized vendor bills a lot, can all live on top of or underneath this stuff, right?
This, just to interject again too here, is we have many clients with vendors who are possibly delivering training services. They're on the road a lot traveling, and they're submitting basically expense reports through Vendor Center. And this is with the screen that Eddie's on right now is where they would make those entries. And then Eddie said it, but in terms of the functionality, it can be automated. It doesn't have to be. The nice thing about this is once this is submitted by the vendor, it comes into NetSuite, and once approved, we have built upon that. The part of the additional part of that customization is to then automatically create the bill. So again, it's fewer touches. It has the oversight, but the vendor's doing most of that work to get paid, and instead of the customer doing that work. So then once it goes to bill, then it's just waiting on receiving a payment records. So just to give you some additional ideas and round that out a little bit, there's a lot of pieces here that Eddie has done to create the behind the scenes work, but it's pretty fluid and it's a nice functionality here that works well. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Travis. Next, we have another section on purchase requests. So this was vendor bills, right? This could easily be changed to purchase orders. And of course, purchase requests, similar in functionality. Depends a little bit on how your system's set up, right? And what your specific use case was, which record would work for you. Again, capability of items and expense lines. So you can have both here. You can see the view is very similar to this one. This one has them side by side. This one has them popped out on top of each other, right? So either one works. And in this case, they're submitting purchase requests, right? Just like if they were submitting vendor bills or purchase orders. They can also add files and upload files to any and all of these things. You can use the file cabinet, or this is an example of our file solution called RightCloud for some more efficient storage. Either one is fine, and that can be at either the body level or the line level. So imagine expense reports and receipts. You probably want one file upload per line so that you can track that with the individual receipt and maintain that indefinitely. Okay. And one of the final things we have here is W-9 and other vendor onboarding, right? So when you bring on a new vendor, you're probably collecting their W-9 information. You're often collecting their ACH information so that they can get paid efficiently. Probably have some questions on who their preferred contacts are. Who do you go for billing? Who do you go to for main say sales contact, etc., you can build a form to collect all of this. So this is another example of a form that lives in NetSuite but looks nothing like NetSuite. And this can be done as either to feed into the vendor portal, right? So maybe before they have access, you have them fill this out. And then there's, again, an approval process in NetSuite. Once they're approved, that vendor portal is automatically configured for them. They get an email about access and they're kind of into the rest of your process. Or maybe you don't want to use the vendor center as a whole, but you just need an efficient way to get new vendors into your system. Again, you can use this form to do so, right? They're where you're pushing the data entry onto them to keep your mind clear, right?
Yeah, I like this functionality. It's really, again, puts it back on some efficiencies that you're driving internally, putting this back to the vendor. And then Eddie, before you move on, would you mind going back to I think it's one of the very first screenshots that show that menu up at the top. And I just wanted to point out too that if you don't already know, Vendor Center it's very, and Eddie said it right. It's just very abbreviated. It uses that vendor license, and there's really not a lot going on in it. And these customizations, like this one at the top where you see the transaction menu and then that drop down, that's part of a customization. And so you could have multiple menus up there driving different types of processes or options for your vendors here in Vendor Center. But I just want to take a moment to point that out, because when you are in Vendor Center with just native functionality, you don't have that. You just have the home button, and then you can navigate around to essentially only those areas that we're showing on the screen. Yeah. Thank you, Eddie. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. So all the customizations we talked about, right? They log into the Vendor Center, they see something similar to this. That menu can be customized to put each of those pieces here. Okay. We go back. I believe that brings us to questions. Licensing. So Vendor Center functionality is included with NetSuite. You can add vendors and vendor licenses at no additional cost. Everything presented today can be performed using a standard Vendor Center user. Additional functionality may leverage a general access user license to allow vendors to have a different level of permission, right? And this would give you more granular access, similar to the options available to your employee full access users today, right? So, but everything we presented can be done with just the standard Vendor Center license. And that brings us to questions. If there are any, Travis, Brian, either of you, feel free to chime in and answer, or you can send them my way.
I don't currently see any in here yet. Really, any questions that you may have, or any further explanation that we can provide on any of these points, please let us know if you want to type it or speak it. We have a question here, right? What has the feedback been like for clients of ours who have utilized the Vendor Center? So I can start answering by answering that, and anybody else on the team can chime in. It's been positive in this regard. So a lot of these customizations are born out of a need for a process, and we're able to articulate that with our clients and then build that out. And some of those you've seen. We've also come up with these processes just knowing the pain points, either based on our own company's use of NetSuite or just working with other clients. The real large benefit is what Eddie was just referring to, is that Vendor Center. It's so abbreviated, and you do get that Vendor Center license that just gives that abbreviated view and functionality. And what we do is we just take and we extend on that, And so you're really working into a process that works for your company, but it's just an extension of what Vendor Center is natively. So the feedback has been very positive. And we do still today, we have our clients come back to continue extending that functionality, or clients that are asking just for new functionality within Vendor Center. Thank you for that question.
The only thing I'll add, and of course it's anecdotal with the people I have worked with, but there's always a certain amount of nervousness, I think, that the information the vendors provide is going to be way out of whack. And from my experience, once things went live, that hasn't been the case. And if it is the case, right, that's where that approval workflow and those on top pieces come from, right? You're not blindly trusting the data that's being entered. You get a chance to look at it. But overall, it seems vast majority have saved them time. And when there is a vendor, it's usually consistently one vendor. So maybe use it for everybody, but the one person that can't seem to enter data correctly.
There's also, when you're logging into NetSuite, or when your vendors are logging into NetSuite, there's that wrapper of security around it. And we have clients that have so many vendors that they're working to collect information on. If you use like the electronic bank payments module, you know that each vendor can participate in that as long as they provide that entity bank detail record information. So Vendor Center can be used to capture that information. They can log in and put that information directly in NetSuite. Yeah. And then I'll read it if you're not seeing it, but there's also a response here that this can be used for our clients that have their vendors managing inventory for them, as it provides the vendor a way to easily enter quantities they need, purchase as a result of the sale made on their behalf. And Eddie went into that a little bit, but that's just an extended example of how Vendor Center can be utilized.
And Sweet World. So you can see the team that's going to be there this year. Of course, we'd love to connect with you in person. So if you plan on coming to Sweet World, definitely let us know.
Yeah, and a little plug on that as well. So we'll be there. We're very interested in meeting with you one-on-one. It's just a great opportunity. If you don't already know, if you don't plan on attending, check it out. There's a lot of opportunity there to learn, go into sessions, sit with your peers and learn what they're doing, possibly learning their pain points, and even asking and extending on your own questions and verification there. So there's a lot of opportunity. It's just rich with information. So hopefully we'll see you at Sweet World. Let us know if you go. Thank you, everybody. Take care.